Okay, so what I want to talk about today is something that we all do more or less when we encounter things in the sky other than astronomical objects. I'm not going to talk about aurora. We've got lots of people to do that who are better at it than I am. But what I want to talk about is the other things we see in the sky, and mostly in a cloudy sky. And here's an example of something I took on October 29 last, or Judy took it, when we encountered it in Polo Park parking lot. And it's a very nice set of halos. And if you were to see these, you'd see the one labeled upper tangent arc there. And you would probably not recognize much of anything else unless you went and had a pretty good look at it. And when you take a picture of it, and then this is not enhanced very much, it's pretty close to what we actually saw. You see that there's a fainter arc up higher called the superlateral arc. And we have, hold on, I get my laser pointer, it's arcing across here. We have faint traces in here of a 22-degree halo. You can only see part of it in here, but it actually extends all the way around. We have not too visible in this, but more visible when we were further back in the parking lot to clear the trees. There is a bright spot down in here, which is the lower tangent arc. And these extensions that come off the side here are actually what's called a peri arc. Now, each one of these is caused by light coming through an ice crystal at a particular angle and then being both dispersed and refracted toward the eye. And there's actually a computer program that you can get in here. I have run it to show an upper tangent arc, and you can see that the upper tangent arc has those horns that we see in this part, and it also has this shape in a lower tangent arc. This one's what it would appear 25 degrees high, but if it actually went higher in the sky, these would join in a circle going all the way around. And you can see here how the light is coming through. This is actually a column crystal, hexagonal column crystal, and the light is coming in through the sides and being diffracted and as it comes through that crystal toward you. And when we see these halos in the sky, we see them as a consequence of these 6 different processes. And each one of them may have one, but more likely several of those kinds of processes. And you're familiar with them, although what we call refraction is actually a combination of refraction and dispersion. So we tend to refer to refraction as the separation of light into colors, but refraction is actually the bending of the light, similar to this picture here where you see light bending in the water bath. Now, reflection, of course, that's pretty easy. Interference, something that you see all the time, but don't necessarily recognize it. Things like the colors when there's a thin film of oil on top of water, that sort of thing. Diffraction's a rather more complicated subject to do. Essentially, when you put an obstacle in the midst of a light beam, it will generate new light beams that then go onward to interfere with each other and reinforce and obscure different wavelengths along the way. And then scattering is something that is simply, just spreading light in all kinds of directions. And you get these processes in both ice crystal and water clouds, although not always the same ones in each one. We get a quick example of reflection. We have 2 kinds. We have what we call specular reflection, which is where you get an image, and you have diffuse reflection where you don't. And the only difference between the 2 of them is that the surface here is very, very agitated, or at least in terms of what the light wave is seeing. So each one of these is the same kind of reflection as over here where the heron is, but they're coming from enormous number of different places, whereas these are reflecting evenly from the surface. Dispersion and refraction. Here in the prism, you see the the refraction, which is the bending of the light beam, and the dispersion is how it's broken up into its colors. In scattering, we have this diagram. I'm shining a laser beam from here through the water, and you can barely see the laser beam here. But when that beam hits this glass of water mixed with a little bit of milk, then you can see the light is scattered by the milk particles and spreads in all directions through the entire glass. And that's actually why clouds appear white, is because light beams are scattered in all directions. They're all mixed together. And when we mix all the colors of light together, we end up with white. We get into diffraction. This is a classical example. Let's say we have a light wave coming along with, say, one single wavelength. When it hits this obstacle, it then begins to spread out in the circular array. Same way a water wave would do exactly the same thing. If you have two apertures, each one of them will spread out, and then the waves from each one of the apertures, the blue and red, will interfere with each other, and you'll end up with bright and dark patterns if these are both the same wavelength. If you've got a whole mixture of colors here, all of the white light wavelengths, then you'll end up with a band of colors in here. And what I've done down below is I've taken a picture. Here's the moon with the through a diffraction grating, which is a transparent grating like a piece of film with a whole bunch of very, very fine lines, so that in fact what you have is thousands to hundreds of thousands of these openings. I should point out that although I show an opening here, these could just as equally have been a pebble sitting in the light beam or a column breaking the light beam. It doesn't have to be an aperture. Over here, I've shone a laser beam through the diffraction grating, and you can see that it breaks up that wavelength of the laser light into a series of patterns. Each one of them is a maximum here, where the two beams have come together and they interfere constructively, or one on top of the other. And I show that along these lines here. So when you look at this thing, a bright spot here from this interference, a bright spot here from this one, straight through image here, and so on. Well, this is happening here, and there's 5 of them on each side of the what we call the zero order spectrum here. When you look at the green beam, you'll see that the position of the first green is not quite in the same position as the first red. And so if you looked at through a diffraction grating at light, it would spread itself out into colors, and they may be discrete colors if it's, say, a street light with only some wavelengths, or into a band of colors if it's a continuous white light spectrum. So when you mix all of these together in the right proportions, you get things like this. And one of the things I want to encourage you to do when you start seeing these things is to look at them closely and see if there's more in the scene than you would normally suspect. Like we see a sundog like this, but do we also notice that it's a little brighter at the top here? This is the upper tangent arc, and here it is in this sundog. Also an upper tangent arc, but then there's another arc here and another halo in here, and this is actually quite dim, and you'd have to look twice before you see it under the most usual circumstances. You also see that these line joining the sundogs here is not quite horizontal. It would be horizontal if it was down close to the horizon, and it gets less and less horizontal as it gets higher up. If you're flying and you're on the down sun side of the aircraft and look out on the ground, these glories, as they called, are very common. We usually are attracted to the moon when it's in the clouds, and of course we get a corona, red and blue colors around the moon under those circumstances. Sometimes we get the sun high in the sky and we just get, this is the 22-degree halo, the same as this halo here and this halo here. So we see sundogs and we comment on them and we photograph them, but how much do we look at them? And incidentally, this is another thing demonstrated in this photo, is the fact that you should probably try to go out and have a clean lens when you start doing these things. Otherwise, you end up with these little dust spots all over because you're pointing your camera at the sun. So what happens when we really start to examine this? We have two halos for one thing. We have a little bit of a bright spot up here because the camera field of view doesn't show that there's actually another arc in that part of the sky. This is very similar to what I've showed you a little earlier. And we can start putting some names on these things. And so this is called the superlateral arc up here. And you can see that it actually goes around quite a long distance. You can only see one side of it here, but it's not round. It's actually oval shaped. Now, sometimes you look at that and think, okay, that's a distortion in the lens of the camera, because there is also another arc called a 46-degree halo, which is almost exactly the same position as the superlateral arc. And in fact, the 46-degree halo is pretty rare. So your first guess would be that you've got the superlateral arc. The parhelic circle, this is the extensions from the sundogs. And on a really good day, those will go entirely around the horizon horizontally, so that if you look behind you, you would see them as well. And what's more, at about 60-degree angle on each side, you would see another bright spot. That's not common. I've only seen it once in my life. But that was last winter. Up above, which we see partly in this previous one, the circumzenithal arc here. Every time you see sundogs, go looking for the circumzenithal arc. Right overhead, circumzenithal, around the zenith. And the lens makes it, this is actually overhead in this part of the lens, but it's a little bit distorted. Anyway, the circumzenithal arc is caused by light ray coming through the top of an hexagonal ice crystal and then bending downward into, after it's been dispersed into red and blue colors. And so your ice crystals that are causing this one are located in this place, but the sunlight is coming in from this direction. You can see the brightening of the sun, and then it's refracting down toward you to give you these colors. It's actually one of the brightest of the arcs, especially when the sun's low. And climbing up to about 22 degrees. Beyond that, it gets fainter and fainter until it disappears. Sundogs, on the other hand, are caused by light that comes in the side of one of these hexagonal crystals, not into the top of it. So that when you look at it, it comes in, it gets dispersed into its colors, and it comes out the other side at a 22-degree angle. So that if you're standing in a position looking at the sun, so that this is coming into your eye, the sun is going to be off in this direction at a 22-degree angle. Sundogs are interesting. They, after the sun gets higher than about 40 degrees, they more or less disappear. And as you're watching a sundog, if you watch it long enough, right in this image, it's over top of the 22-degree halo, but as the sun rises higher in the sky, the sundog will actually move up into this area. This curve will get much more pronounced, and it'll move away from the 22-degree halo. Now, not very often you see sundogs that last for a long time in the daytime. So, you know, you have the right kind of clouds to go for an extended period of time. Moondogs, of course, is something else. They're usually pretty faint, although if you go online, you'll find some very good pictures of moondogs, much brighter than this example. But for the most part, whenever I see them, I never have a camera with me. And so we end up with just having to appreciate them by eye. And these halos that you get don't have to be somewhere up high in the sky. If you've got ice crystal precipitation, you can see them actually forming in front of the terrain, in front of buildings if you're in the city, showing you that the ice crystals are actually pretty close by. Anytime I see ice crystals falling in the sky, I start looking for halos. And while they're not always there, sometimes you're rewarded. This incidentally was on the morning of the transit of Mercury, when the sun rose with Mercury already on its surface. Another kind of halo that we see is the sun pillar. This is also from the transit of Mercury night. This one sticks up above the sun, which is just coming over the horizon. This one sticks down below, and we might also see a second one above the sun if this altocumulus or stratocumulus wasn't in the way. But they're spectacular, especially when you get this kind of an appearance. And they're actually a reflection phenomenon. They're not diffraction and dispersion. And it's just the simple ice crystals, flat hexagonal ice crystals that are kind of wobbling as they fall, and they're acting as little mirrors and just reflecting the light of the sun toward your eye from either above or below. They're actually pretty common, but we don't normally pay too much attention to them because they're not as dramatic as these pictures were. Where we do pay attention to them is when you see them at night with the lights of the city shining and reflecting off of the ice crystals as they fall down from the sky, usually from a cirrus level like this one up here. Picture taken from central Winnipeg over near Assiniboine Park. Glories are an interesting thing because we really haven't got a good explanation for glories. Now, these are the same picture. This is more or less the visual appearance, but with a little enhancement, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and possibly 5 rings out here, plus the 6th one in the center. This is obviously a diffraction pattern because of the way the circle appears here. But one of the problems we have is that these are exactly opposite the sun. But how does the light from the sun get reflected back exactly at 180 degrees? Because in a water droplet, when the light ray enters the droplet, say this is the droplet, it comes in from the side, it's reflected and reflected, but it doesn't come back out straight this way. It comes out at an angle like that. So there isn't any way using conventional reflection and refraction phenomena or physics to be able to explain how the light ray came exactly back toward you. And one of the explanations, possibly the best so far, although not completely accepted, is that there is kind of a quantum wave tunneling along the side of the drop that carries it a few extra degrees so that it's then able to return directly toward your eye. These are very common in any aircraft flight as long as you're looking on the right side of the aircraft. For coronas in the moon, you can get beautiful effects in it. This is not particularly colorful, but we've all seen much better ones than that. It always helps to use a HDR setting on your camera when you're taking these pictures so that you can get some sort of detail in the moon. This again can be caused by either water or ice crystals and the diffraction of light. And we talked about diffraction, how it is a process that occurs around little openings or around particles. In this case, it's the individual droplets or the individual crystals that are the barriers that produce the diffraction phenomenon. A fog bow is in some ways a rainbow, but it's from very, very tiny water droplets. And so while the water droplet that forms a rainbow is large enough to cause enough dispersion into the colors, the fog bow scatters all of the light waves that pass through the little tiny droplets, and it turns out that they adopt a white color. You can often produce them in a car headlights if you're driving through fog. And there are other phenomena that's sometimes worth stopping and just admiring the phenomena that occur, and the play a light in the headlights of a car if you stop in a fog, not on a main highway. Iridescence in cloud is very common, another diffraction phenomenon. The interesting thing about this is that if the light beam is diffracted twice, the color separation begins to get mixed up and disappears. So you'll usually only find corona on the edges, thin edges of a cloud where the light's only diffracted once, or in thin clouds where it can do the whole thing. You typically find them in cumuliform clouds because they like to have a pretty similar droplet size throughout the cloud to cause the coloring, and cumulus clouds tend to form quickly and with all the same kinds of droplet sizes until they get a little older and start to coalesce. We found that we get some very nice iridescence in the clouds at eclipses. Here's the sun right here, and you can see it's a very tiny crescent, but somehow, although nobody's been able to tell me why, somehow it seems that iridescence is a little bit more common. And you'll see that they're actually in circular bands. You don't see those in individual clouds as small as this. But if you get the right kind of circumstances or enough of it, you may be able to trace out some circular bands. A reflection phenomenon is the subsun, another thing that you can see most easily from an aircraft. Here's a picture of the sun up here shining off the aircraft wing here, but also being reflected from ice crystals in the cloud below. Here's a little bit more of a zoom in a different one of them. I've showed you mostly fairly simple halos in this, the ones that are reasonably common you could expect to see just about every year if you're under the right circumstances. But sometimes you get something like this. This was sent to me by a fellow from Daryl Nye, and this was photographed in the summer in Arizona, so you do not need to have winter conditions, although it helps to get all of these things. And so here you can see the upper tangent arc and the peri arcs, but there are additional arcs in here and in here, and this is not the circumzenithal arc. Beautiful combinations of crystals forming all of these different patterns in the sky. For rainbows, it's actually quite difficult to get into the right place to see a whole rainbow, and especially when you have a double rainbow like this. And the reason it's difficult is because you have to have the storm just passed. You have to have the sun low enough that it's actually forming a rainbow. And you have to be able to get there, especially if you're storm chasing, which is where I usually encounter them. You have to get there at the right moment. And typically the storms move farther away, so you only get the top of the rainbow, or you'll see a piece of it off to one side and the rest of it. So when you start looking at this rainbow, you'll notice that there's a dark band in the middle between the two of them. That's called Alexander's dark band. But there's also a brighter area inside the primary bow here. The colors are reversed, so the secondary bow up here has red on the inside and the primary bow has red on the outside. And when you trace this path, somebody dropped their watch. You trace the path of light waves, you can see that for the primary bow with one reflection and two refractions, one here and one here, that you have the red on one side and the blue on the other. But when you get the two reflections, you reverse that pattern, just like looking at yourself in a mirror. There's a lot of structure in rainbows. If you look closely, you can get what's called supernumerary arcs underneath the rainbow. They tend to be pretty transitory. When I'm very, very seldom I've been ready with a camera when I start to see them, but you can see when you do some enhancement that they can form a wonderful set of patterns. And they're caused by the interference of light waves that have gone through the raindrop. So we show a light ray coming in here and going through its path. But if that thing was just slightly higher and came through here, these would be at slightly different angles, and the reds and the greens and the blues and everything else can interfere with each other as they take these separate little paths through the raindrop. And if conditions are right, they'll form these supernumerary bows. Circumhorizontal arc, I've only seen one of these in my life. They're noted as being the single most colorful arc. This one is taken in British Columbia one day. I was driving in the mountains and trying desperately to find a place to stop on a winding road. But you can see I have some iridescence in the cloud here, but this has just exactly the right ice crystals to be able to give me this. It was given an unfortunate name of the fire rainbow, by some Seattle reporter at one time. And so you might find it called that, or a fire halo and other things. It would compete with the circumzenithal arc for being the most colorful, but the circumzenithal arc comes by much more often. Your sun has to be quite high up to see these kind of arcs, and we would only see them at the height of summer when the sun passes above about 35 or 40 degrees. This is when I was actually preparing this lecture, and I said, okay, I've got a 22-degree halo, and then I realized that first of all, there's a 22-degree halo in here, but you see it mostly as this dark edge, and that we have this oval-shaped arrow or halo that we've already mentioned to you, called a circumscribed halo. And here's what it looks like when you run it through this program that I'm going to tell you about, where you can recreate these halos, and most of that structure's in there. Now, this outer halo, I'm still a bit mystified by it. What I have to do is go back with this lens and photograph the sun and see whether that halo reappears again, because it's either an infralateral arc or it's an internal reflection in the camera. Now, when you get to looking at these halos, you've got to sometimes really do some digging in the literature to find out just exactly what kind they are and then compare them closely. Again, thinking this was a 22-degree halo that was stretched out by the fact that I had a 10-millimeter lens at f10, but now I realize that it's in fact almost entirely duplicatable by this, except that I have no sundogs in this. And interesting here, it does show this is the 22-degree halo. When the sun is this side, the sundogs are moved way off of the 22-degree halo. Shadows are interesting too. Sometimes if you're flying and you look down below, if you're flying over grass, or in this case, forest, you see a bright spot that's following you. If you're driving alongside a wheat field and the sun is low on one side and you look at the shadow of your car stretching out, you'll see that there's a bright white patch or a bright colored patch that seems to be following along with you on the road. This is actually called the opposition effect. And what happens is we look at this image here, the top one. We're looking at a number of little cylinders like buttons on the ground. You see the ones that are directly opposite the sun have no shadow, but the ones off to the side, you're looking at their shadow because they're not directly in line with the sun, which is directly behind you. And that's what's happening here. You're seeing partial shadow in here as each one of the trees creates its own shadow, and you are seeing part of that shadow. But in here, which is directly opposite the sun, you don't see the shadow because it's directly behind the tree, and so it appears like a bright spot. Other things, the belt of Venus, of course, is well known to us from some other discussions we've had, but shadows themselves, if you can get up on high mountains, make some very interesting pictures. Unfortunately, it was a day early on this picture because the next day, that moon was the day before full. The next day it was here, it was full, and it was a lunar eclipse. Heiligenschein is a little different. It looks like the opposition effect here. This was taken at Sprucewood Star Party. This is Judy's shadow here. What's happening here is this rising sun is directly behind her. She's on the lip of a hill looking down on the grass below. And there's this bright aura around her. And that bright aura is actually caused by water droplets. There was a heavy dew that night. Water droplets on the leaves, focusing the light onto the back of the leaf as it passes through the droplet and then reflecting it back toward her. So she gets this bright spot around her from essentially the focusing of light rays by water droplets. And of course, we're all familiar with crepuscular rays, where spreading out from where the sun is setting. But if you look on the opposite side of the sky, you may see these light rays coming together again in the anti-crepuscular light rays. So here's the program I've been telling you about. It's called halosim3.exe. And with it, it comes with a lot of canned programs that you could modify. And it's pretty sophisticated. You could specify the type of ice crystal and their size, how much they wobble as they come down, whether they're falling steadily or whether they're following in a rather jiggly pattern. And of course, those jiggly patterns, when they're moving side to side, tend to spread out the colors and makes these halos a little less prominent. And if you go to the AT Optics website, where it's probably the primary site for seeing these things. I'll give you the address in the next slide. You can see all these examples, and a fellow, Les Cowley, the guy that runs it, will often comment on pictures and tell what's happening, how the crystals, what kind of crystal shape you have and how they're falling. Because you typically, if you were to take a plate and drop it out of a third-story apartment, it would fall. It would wobble at first, but then fall flat. It would fall horizontally because that's the most stable position. And so that's typically the sort of things that gives you your sundogs. But if those plates are falling down in the other direction, sort of with their flat sides vertical, then you get a completely different set of halos. That would be a very unstable situation, probably wouldn't last. So the whole world of halos is a fascinating subject, and with some incredible things to see. So the best advice I can tell you is to always take a look at the sky. Don't assume that nothing is going to happen. Whenever there's cirrus cloud, especially, I'm always looking for halos. When you photograph them, bracket them, because usually the sun, or often the sun, is in the exposure, and you want to be able to pull out the richness of the color in them. Here's the website where you can get details. There's a link to it from spaceweather.com, because they often have halo pictures in there. So something you can do on a cloudy day or cloudy night, just keep an eye on the sky and look to see what you can for halos. And that's what we have for you today.
Okay, thanks very much, Jay. Any questions quickly? We're running a little bit late, but any questions for Jay?
I expect to see some pictures showing up on the RASC list pretty soon. Okay, I'm good.
Hey, and if this went by really, really quickly for you, always remember that you can go onto the events page of the winnipeg.rasc.ca website, and not long after, maybe a few days after we have these meetings, you'll see a meeting recording, and the beginner session is part of that meeting recording. So you always have the ability to go back and watch it again. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see that. So welcome to the November 2021 meeting of the RASC Winnipeg Centre. I am not Dennis. Dennis is not able to be here. My name's Gord Tulloch, and I'll be your host this evening. And yeah, we may be here till midnight, but I'll try to keep us going as best I can. So the agenda for today, just move screens around. Oh, first of all, I guess I'll do the Aboriginal acknowledgement. The lands from which our members and guests are joining us are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, and we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So our agenda for this evening, you just saw the beginner session with Jay. This is the meeting welcome, and we'll be doing some announcements. We have a few different things going on, so the announcements will be a little longer than normal, but hopefully we'll be able to get through them quickly. We've got a bit of a call for volunteers that we want to highlight. It was definitely, it is well covered in the newsletter, but we did want to talk about it at the meeting. We have a new observing group, a special interest group, or an interest group starting up, and we'll have a little bit of a slide on that and some explanation. Bryan will be here talking about nominations and awards. We have a nominations committee and an awards committee that has met, and he'll talk about that a little bit. nominations for our upcoming annual meeting, where we will have some nominations for counselors, and he'll talk about that. And then Bryan is doing the What's Up tonight, since Jay was doing the beginner session. Dr. Michelle Boyce will be here for What's New. We'll take a break and we'll do some breakout rooms. We'll have a social breakout room, and we'll also have one for anybody that wants to talk about the volunteer positions that we talk about, and anything else sort of council related. And after the break, we'll be joined by Dr. Jennifer West for our main presentation, Inside the Galactic Tunnel in the Sky. And if you've been watching the press recently, this is a familiar topic to you, so we'll be able to get into more detail with a very familiar face to the center, obviously, Dr. Jennifer West. And following the meeting, as always, we'll have a virtual get-together so that we can have the virtual analog of our Boston Pizza social evening that we had after the meeting. So once we're out of the meeting, we will continue with this Zoom meeting. So you just have to hang tough, and we'll do that. This is a Zoom meeting. This is no longer a webcast. So we would appreciate if everybody could remain muted and turn the video off for this meeting, so there's no distractions. And once we get into our break and into our virtual get-together, feel free to turn your cameras and your mics on, and you can interact together. So that's the purpose for making this a meeting versus a webcast, that we can turn off and on people interacting as we go, as opposed to it being just simply a presentation. So moving on to announcements, one notice that, and you'll see a notice in the newsletter, that the final copy of the bylaws is on the website. It is under the internal menu. You need to log into the website first to see that internal menu, and that's all of the internal functions of the site. You can log into the internal menu, and it is under the regulations and bylaws menu. So have a look at it. You will be voting on it in December. It would be good if everybody had a look at it. It would be preferable that we don't have discussion about the bylaws at that meeting, because then it will be a very long meeting indeed. So we just want to make sure everybody has had a look at it and are prepared to vote. Any questions you might have about the bylaws can be directed to any of your counselors, and we'll attempt to answer your question or get you the answer. Okay, the St. Malo's Spring Star Party is still on for the last weekend in April. That will be similar to the Spruce Woods. It'll be a day shorter because it is not a long weekend, but we will do our best to make it a fun-filled weekend. So that is still on the boards, and we will be finalizing that in January when we can actually book the park. We will be booking the park prior to its opening to the public, which means we'll have the park all to ourselves, and we'll have a nice campground with lots of facilities. However, all of the electricity and water and so on will be turned off, so we'll have to be self-sufficient there. So more details coming up on that as we progress. We still have the mentorship program running, and we now have 5 mentors and 14 learners. I added one more, Judy, and I saw that one come by. And we are still accepting more. And once again, on the internal menu of the website, we have a mentorship page that you can go to, and you can fill out a form if you'd like to become a mentor. You can fill out a form and tell us what you would like to be able to mentor people on. And if you would like to be a learner, there's also a button there. You can click on the button, fill out a form, and that will get you set up to become a learner. So you would be assigned a mentor in the subjects that you were looking at, and that mentor would contact you, and you can begin one-on-one interaction. Telescopes for Kids has kicked off. We had some press coverage early on Global TV. Early in the morning as well as early in the month. That went very well. We got some coverage on their Twitter feed and on their website as well. And we will be on CTV TV on November 22nd. Actually, we have about 5 spots on CTV TV on the morning show. So we will be doing that to promote the Telescopes for Kids project, and not only to hopefully get some donations of telescopes in cash so that we can give away more telescopes, but also to encourage kids to actually start entering the contest and hopefully win some telescopes. So we actually have about 7 or 8 telescopes right now. We actually had got enough funding to purchase a couple of Orion Starblast 4.5-inch telescopes and a couple of Celestron zoom lenses. So that is going quite well. We've got lots of telescopes to give away, and now we're waiting for all the contest entries to come in from all the different kids. So we've been promoting it to a lot of different groups, and we're starting to see the entries coming in. The entries will be evaluated by a committee of RASC members, and the awards will be made in the latter part of December before Christmas. We'll get out and we'll award those telescopes, and hopefully the press will be there to do some coverage on that too. Donations are still appreciated. We appreciate all of the donations from the membership that we've gotten already. They've gone directly to purchase items that will be awarded to kids with telescopes. Generally, we're doing things like buying Celestron eyepieces and things that we can include with the telescope to replace the really, really crappy, these, I keep showing people, these kind of eyepieces that come with these telescopes. So any donations would still be appreciated. There's a GoFundMe page, and there is a Telescopes for Kids page on the website under programs. You can have a look at that, and that's where the GoFundMe site. And you can see the rules of the contest as well. If you know a kid that's interested, make sure they enter. So we are starting up interest groups, and the first interest group that we're starting up is a binocular observing group, and that is being run by Darren Hennick. And Darren, I hope you're around. And do you have any comments? I will flip over to that slide. There he is.
Hi, thanks, Gord. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I just got permission from our council and supported starting up this particular interest group. So as many of you know, I'm a big fan of binoculars. We do have some members in the club that are interested. I just basically wanted to remind everybody this is open to all new and current RASC members in good standing. So really anybody who's interested in binocular observing in general, it doesn't have to be exclusive binocular observing. Certainly, if you just have an interest in it, you're welcome to join as well. I have put up a few little posts just as a prelude to the meeting here on the RASC Winnipeg forum site. So please take a look at that. And go ahead and introduce yourself. I did a roll call page. So go ahead if you want to join. Just let us know who you are and what you have and what kind of interests you have, so we can coordinate some of our future activities for the group aligned with sort of the bulk of the interest for folks there. But we're expecting it to be a lot of fun, and the nice thing with binoculars, you can get out lots. So we're hoping to do some fun things this upcoming year. Other than that, if you have any other questions, you can either contact me, my email's down at the bottom here, or go ahead and post them on the forum site as well. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Oh, one last thing. For those new observers who are still kind of deciding on equipment, binoculars are a great way to get started learning the night sky because you have the wider fields of view. So I think it's really important for some of you new club members who maybe we haven't met yet. Feel free to send me an email. Let me know what you're looking at exploring on, and maybe we can even align it with some of the mentorship programs that Judy's coordinating as well. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Darren. And just a note that we do have a set of binoculars that were donated to the club, a set of binoculars and a tripod that is part of the loaner pool. So if you did not have your own set of binoculars, you could borrow the club binoculars for a month, try them out, see if it is a good fit for you. And certainly Darren can provide you with lots of information on appropriate binoculars for astronomical observing. So thanks very much, Darren. Appreciate it.
One last thing, Gord, forgot to mention. I will be, Judy's asked me to give a talk on binoculars next month. So stay tuned for that as well. That'll align with the launch here of the group as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we talked about telescopes for kids briefly. As usual, I read the slide, give the agenda slide give all the details and then have to flip through all the other slides. But here's the address if you do want to send an entry. We have a telescopes for kids at winnipeg.rasc.ca email address that they can be sent to. And I note that they can be an essay, a story, a video, a song. It doesn't need to be an essay as we did last time. And we've gotten some actually very innovative entries so far. It's going to be interesting to evaluate all these entries. The kids are able to use their full creativity if we open up the format like that. So all entries must be in place before December 1st. And as I said, we'll make sure to deliver those by Christmas Eve. So I wanted to talk a little bit about volunteers. Now, again, this information is in the newsletter in quite a bit of detail. So we just wanted to touch on some of the volunteer positions that are available both in the center and as well for the star parties that we hold. I know that Sylvia is looking for volunteers for the Sprucewood Star Party coming up next September. But in the meantime, for the April Star Party, we're looking for very similar positions. And my hope, being an organizational kind of guy, is that we will create a Star Party committee that will work on both of the star parties. And that way we can have a bit of a standing committee as opposed to having to recruit every year. But definitely committing to one star party does not commit you to another one as well. So, as always with all of these positions, you're able to put in as much effort as you are able to, and hopefully you can find a position to volunteer for, which is conducive to your skill set and the things you like to do. So for general center appointed positions, we have two new positions and one existing position that we're looking for someone to fulfill. The meeting coordinator position is essentially someone who will keep track of what's going on for upcoming meetings. It does not necessarily mean that you are on the hook to get all of the content together for the meetings. That's not the intent of this position. This position is to make sure that we don't have any gaps. And if we do have any gaps, for example, if we're missing a main presentation for a particular meeting, to let council know, and we can work as a group to try to get those gaps filled. So the meeting coordinator is exactly that, a coordinator, as opposed to somebody who's on the hook to do all of the meetings. So that coordinator position is currently being fulfilled by Judy, for in a large part. And of course, she's busy with the mentorship program as well. So we're looking for somebody to take that on. Of course, you have lots of experience in the council to assist you in learning how that position works. So we would really like to see somebody move into that position. Of course, you don't have to be an expert. This is just somebody who can help set up a meeting, and we've got lots of people who can help you. Similarly, we're looking for a volunteer coordinator, and this volunteer coordinator, once again, is not on the hook to volunteer for everything. It's to make sure that we have volunteers for different events, and to keep a pool of volunteers, and also to keep track of who has volunteered for what, because we really want to start getting into a position in the club where we are providing recognition for volunteers. We have a lot of people who do a lot of volunteering and they don't get nearly enough recognition. We do have the awards program, and that's great, but both our national and as well as our center councils are very interested in making sure that people who do volunteer are recognized. So this would be as much a record keeping kind of position as somebody who is going out and finding folks to volunteer. Once again, this is a coordinator position, so you are not on the hook to make sure there are volunteers. You're on the hook to make sure that council knows that we need volunteers, and to maintain a list, and we can work together to get people to volunteer for things. So this is a huge part of bringing new services to our center, is that we need the volunteers to staff them, or they simply won't happen. right? So we can plan all we like to have all sorts of services to our members, but if we don't have the volunteers to help run them, then it falls to just a few people, and it's not a sustainable situation. Those people burn out, and then we won't have those services anymore. Finally, I have been the webmaster for the club for a couple of years, and obviously I can actually wear a lot of hats, and webmaster is the one that I would be most happy to pass on to somebody else. Our website is fairly mature. It doesn't need a lot of technical know-how to use the website and to add content and make sure that the events that are listed on the website and, you know, keeping things up to date. This is not a highly technical position. If you need technical stuff, I will still be around to do that. This is someone to coordinate getting content on the site and making sure it's up to date. And if we do want to embark on any new sort of sections of the website, that would be somebody who would be specifying exactly what we need, generating the content, and then I would be assisting in implementing it from a technical standpoint. So this is not a purely technical position. Basically, if you know enough technology to be able to operate a word processor competently, you would do well as a webmaster. So if you are interested in doing that, certainly it would be very helpful to have somebody who can keep on top of that and keep the content fresh on the website so that everything is being posted. Now, as I said, the Star Party Committee has there's two Star Parties, one that we've been running for a long time, and Sylvia has been, Sylvia and Jerry have been instrumental in keeping it going. So the Sprucewood Star Party, as well as the new St. Malo Spring Star Party, are looking for a committee to assist in operating that. So for a chairperson, I will be an acting chairperson for that Star Party, since I was the guy that brought it forward in the first place. Sylvia is still the chairperson for the Sprucewood Star Party. We're looking for somebody who could assist in advertising, marketing, and promotion. That would be just simply making sure that, for example, the Royal Astronomical Society National is aware of the Star Party and is listing it in its listings. It's showing up in Sky News and that sort of thing. So this person would just be responsible for making sure that people know about the Star Party. Registration coordinator would be responsible for working with the webmaster to have the registration set up on the website, as well as taking registrations at the site. So basically what Sam Giesbrecht was doing at the last Star Party, and making sure that somebody is sitting at a desk able to take registrations. Once again, doesn't mean you're going to be stuck at a desk the entire Star Party, but you need to just simply coordinate somebody to sit there and take registrations. Keynote and workshop coordinators similarly would be setting up the Sunday keynotes, or I should say Sunday workshops, and any keynotes that are set up on the Star Party schedule. And swap table coordinator, Dennis did this last year, somebody to just coordinate making sure there's a swap table and running it while it's on. Scope tour coordinator, again, Michelle did this last year very ably, and it's just someone to coordinate running a scope tour on the site on one of the days of the Star Party. Observing site camp coordinator, this would be the person responsible for making sure there's no white light, for making sure that there are events at the Star Party like the binoculars and green laser tours and that sort of thing, and just somebody to just make sure that everything is operating and happening when it's supposed to be happening. And finally, a refreshments and meals coordinator, and that is someone to operate a, make sure there is someone there to operate coffee and tea. And if people have brought refreshments, to make sure they're put out and they're stored appropriately. And again, this is not the person who goes and makes all the refreshments, just making sure if there's something to have on the table that somebody is taking care of it. So those positions are, again, listed in great detail in the newsletter. If you're interested, contact me, contact anyone on the council, and we would be happy to talk to you about them further and see if there's a good fit there. So I will hold any questions for the break, because we will have a breakout room to talk specifically about volunteers, as well as anything you want to talk about the sort of internals of the club. So we'll move on. So we're going to turn it over to Bryan Stach now, and he is going to talk about nominations and awards. And Bryan is also doing What's Up. And so Bryan, you can move straight into What's Up after you're done your nominations and awards segment. Here's Bryan.
Gord. All right, so I'll just break into okay, so for the awards and the nominee committee that we have here, there we go. Okay, so we have the upcoming elections in January of 22. So basically, we do have 2 positions that's currently open, 2 council positions. We are accepting nominations for them, but with the new bylaws that are going to be passed or will be passed in December this year, more positions will be made available. Now, if you want to send nominations to someone who thinks will be qualified for the positions on council, please send it directly to my email here, bstach@mts.net. I'm the chairman of the nominee committee and also the past president. Now, for the awards committee, if you want to nominate someone for an award, that's something someone has done some outstanding achievement or recognitions, as Gord has mentioned earlier about it, please send it my way and we'll review it. I know that like he said, a lot of people get recognized or doesn't get recognized for some of the achievements or some of the service that they put towards the group. All right, so that's all I have for the election. I'm going to switch over to What's Up in the Night Sky.
And if you could just hold for 1 second, though, I think one thing that's important to note is that the reason why there's only a couple of positions up for election this year is that the majority of council are currently 1 year into 2-year terms. And that's why instead of a sort of a full slate of council positions, we have just a couple of councillors, because there was a fairly significant turnover of council last year. So we have just these 2 councillor positions that are available. So sorry, just thought I'd bring that up.
No, that's a good point, Gord. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so okay, let's start up with What's Up in the Night Sky. I'm gonna switch over here and F5. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'll try to be brief because we are running a bit behind. So this is for What's Up in November. We got 2 big events coming up. I'm really excited about this one. We're going to start off with the planets. Okay, as for the planets, unfortunately, most of them are going to be visible only during the evenings. Mercury will be too low in the sky in the morning towards the twilight, but of course, it will get closer to the sun. Venus, again, it'll be low in the evening, but it'll make its way up through the month. Of course, Mars will not be observable this month because it's too close to the sun. And Jupiter, Saturn, unfortunately, is going to set really early this evening, so it's just going to be an evening viewing only. But Uranus, it's going to be a prime viewing for this month because of location. Now, for the events that we have for this month, of course, we have the north and south Terran meteor shower that's going on. It's going on tonight for the north one, that is. We have a Lyraen meteor shower, but unfortunately, because of the full moon, it's not going to be great viewing. As I mentioned, Uranus is going to be up on November the 15th. It's going to only be 1.5 degrees from the north of the moon, so it'll be pretty easy for you guys to locate it. We do have the partial lunar eclipse. I'll talk more about that later. Full moon's on the 19th, and we have the double transit on Jupiter, where I'll show you more in greater detail what's that all about. Okay, the north Taurus meteor shower is happening actually tonight. I've just looked at the forecast. Unfortunately, it doesn't look very promising tonight, but who's to say? One exception about this meteor shower is that the high percentage of fireballs that does happen, it's in the constellation Taurus. Of course, the north and south is virtually the same. We do have about 5 meteors per hour, but realistically, it might be only 4. Okay, so here, We do have the winter constellation Orion coming up. It's starting to rise around about 9:30. Up here, you'll see we have the north and south turret meteor showers right above Orion. So it should be quite easily to locate it for some of the beginners. Okay, so like I said, the lunar meteor shower that's happening, unfortunately, it's because it's going to be the full moon. Unfortunately, it would not be great viewing, but I'll mention it anyways. It's going to happen on November the 17th in the pre-dawn. Now for the partial eclipse that's happening right now, or I mean, not right now, but happening on November the 19th. As you can see, North America is in prime position for viewing, but unfortunately, it's only the partial lunar eclipse. To give you a better example here, I got this example here. We got the Primum and the Umbra shadow of the Earth, but what I'm going to do to make it a little simple for our viewers here is I put up a little simulation from Solarium about how it's supposed to look. Okay, we got the times that it's going to happen. We have the partial eclipse at 1:18, the maximum at 3:02, and of course it's a 6-hour event. So this is where the partial eclipse starts to begin around 1:18. Just kind of give you an idea of what's going on here. Remember, it's only a partial lunar eclipse, so it doesn't cover the moon completely. But forecast looks promising, but most of the night you'll be able to see it. But if it's going to cloud over in the morning, I'll talk about more about the weather later. As you can see, it's going to be a 6-hour event. All right. The double transit on Jupiter. I really like this because you get to see much of the moon. As you notice that it's going to happen on November the 23rd, just after sunset. As you can see, it's going to be just after 5 o'clock. Now, what I've done here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here. Just kind of give you an idea that if you do look at it, you can see lots of the moons of Jupiter. This is also the time where the double transit is going to happen on Jupiter. But what I've done is, I'm going to skip over to the next slide, right over here. So I've broken up the different times. So we got the first transit at 5:05. The second one is going to appear at just before 6. Now, what's really exciting is that we get the red spot that's happening too. So this is going to be a really exciting night for us. It's going to wrap up just before 10 o'clock, but this is a really good event you guys to see. As for the weather, okay, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention about there is a possible comet out, 67P. This is supposed to be the one of the most researched comet out there. We did land on it. Apparently, it's magnitude of 9.4, so 6-inch telescope or greater to get it in there. The estimated magnitude is 11, so that's kind of dark, but according to my information, the brightness will increase by December, but we'll wait to see. As you can see, it's in the constellation Gemini. So anyways, well, hopefully we'll have some clear skies, but again, I just checked the weather. It doesn't look promising. So let's check the weather. Okay, as you can see here, the blue is going to be the humidity. As you can see, it's going to be quite close to 100% almost. And then of course, this dips down to 80. That's because we do have some forecasts of snow in here. As you can see, for the temperature wise here, this is 0 right here. It is going to get colder. Now, if you notice this little dip here, that looks like a good indication of some clear skies. So let's see the cloud coverage right now, or I mean, for the next 10-day forecast that we have here. As you can see, this is the cloud coverage up here. It dips a little bit. So we have a little bit of clear skies on Friday, which is tonight. But again, the forecast doesn't look promising. Now for the event of the partial lunar eclipse on November the 19th, you can see at 12 a.m. right here, we do have a little bit of an opening there for it. We'll just have to cross our fingers and hope for the best. So anyways, clear skies to everyone and have a good evening. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bryan. Okay, so just one thing I wanted to mention, due to the weather and of course, probably the road conditions of the driveway out to the observatory, members observing night tomorrow night is canceled. So we will try to do a makeup evening as opposed to waiting another whole month and then having that canceled. We'll try to do a makeup evening where there will be people out who can do some training on the observatory, as well as make sure people have access to the warm room and that sort of thing. So stay tuned for more information on that. But as of tomorrow, given the weather and probably the fact that the driveway to the observatory has not been plowed as yet, we will not be having members observing night. Sorry. Okay, so next up is Dr. Michelle Boyce with What's New? There, Michelle? Oh. We're not hearing you.
Yeah, she was mentioning she was having mic problems. I wonder, Michelle, if you'd like, you could actually try dialing in.
That
Oh,
could
there
take
you are.
time.
Nope,
Yeah,
we hear you now. Okay.
Just one sec. Okay, sorry, I'm back. I will try sharing again. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason my noise cancellation headset mic is not working, so I switched to my laptop mic, so you might hear some background noise. Okay, so I decided I would go through the EMU pilot survey paper, which just came out recently, well, not, a month or so ago. And it's quite an interesting paper, and it has a lot of observations they've made of the radio sky. So if you're interested in looking at the paper, you just have to Google evolutionary map of the universe, and you'll find it in an archive that's online. Okay, so what is the EMU pilot survey? Well, actually, it's a survey done with the ASCAP radio telescope array, which is the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder. It's a part of a proposed plan of a much more complicated network called a Square Kilometre Array, which includes sites in Australia and Africa. But I'm not going to get into that now. That would take up a considerable amount of time. So we're just looking at this Pathfinder, which is a precursor for that. It has 36 working dishes spread over 4 kilometers. These dishes are 12 meters in diameter, and they have rotating phased array feeds with 188 dipole receivers. And basically, you can take all these telescope signals and put them together and form a virtual telescope that has 36 synthesized beams, and these are the beam numbers, and something just happened. Give me a second. I lost my PowerPoint. It is back. Okay, so everyone can hear and see the slides?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so anyway, it has 36 synthesized beams. Each beam has a 1.5 degree field of view and a pitch of 0.9 degrees, which basically means it has a uniform sky coverage of 270 degrees of sky. So what this shows is the ASCAP telescope, proposed telescope, which will cover all the way from the South Pole to 30 degrees declination. And the pilot survey that basically is doing a dry run and testing the telescope instruments is just doing this small area here that's in yellow. And I've also shown it blowing up here. And it's covering the area of 1,350 full moons, just to give you an idea. And the resolution is 11 to 12 arc seconds. And if I recall correctly, the great red spot of Jupiter is 7.9 arc seconds, just to give you an idea. It's a radio telescope, so it's running at 194 megahertz, and it takes roughly 10 to 12 hours to acquire each tile. Okay. Now, this is an entire composite image of the EMU pilot survey, which I believe was completed in 2019, and now they've finished processing and have submitted a paper. And there's a lot of objects in here, and I'm just showing this one small object here just to give you an example of how much detail is in here. And there are over 183 simple sources. So a simple source is just a point source like this, and 40,000 complex sources, which this is a more complex source. And these aren't extracted by hand because of the vast number. So they have software tools that do this. So there's a source finding software that's used by ASCAP. And that's called C'est la Vie, and that's used to extract this information and put it in catalogs with various properties for researchers to use. Okay, so let's get into the survey. So I'll mainly look at some of the more peculiar objects or complex objects. So this one is called the dancing ghosts. And what we have here is these surveys were actually done overlapping with the dark energy survey. So these are optical images from the Dark Energy Survey telescope. And then this green stuff here is the radio image that's superimposed on top. So what you see here is there's an apparent source of jets coming out of here and causing this diffuse emission. And there's some kind of medium here in which it's hitting and bouncing into and interacting. So you have these two galaxies here, and it's not clear from the information they have whether these are actually part of a complex or just superimposed in terms of distances. Just as a brief reminder, I like to bring up when I talk about certain technical details, I like to just put a bit of background. So this is an example of one of my favorite images to use as an example. This is an example of a jet interacting with its surroundings. So you have in the middle here, you have a black hole and some host galaxy, and then these jets coming out, X-rays, and then ramming into the surrounding medium. And you can see a shock wave here. The blue is X-ray, and then this is infrared and optical all mixed together. So if we look at it in that system, then we can see that there's relativistic jets, a host galaxy, and you can see the ramming into the medium, and then this diffuse emission around. This structure coming out here, they have no clue what that is at the moment. So now astronomers like to measure things in redshift distance measurements. So I'm just going to bring this into focus. So basically, if you remember the idea of the Big Bang, you can think of a balloon that if you blow up, it expands. And if you draw little galaxies on the balloon, they separate. And that rate of separation, that's like our universe, but you have to imagine it in 3 dimensions on some hypersurface. And it expands. So as stuff moves away on a balloon, they move faster and faster away the further they are away. And that rate of expansion is given by the Hubble constant, which is set here at 67.36 kilometers per second per megaparsec, which is just the distance. A megaparsec is 3.2 million light years. Also, what happens is when you're looking at these objects, their spectrum gets shifted into the red. And so the wavelengths here, you look at this and you measure the wavelengths and you notice everything shifted, but you can tell from the signature of the spectrum what that is a spectrum of. And therefore you can find the difference or the shift in wavelength between there, subtract that with respect to your wavelengths measured in your laboratory, and that gives you the redshift, which is the ratio of the speed of light, the speed that it's moving away to the speed of light. So the reason they do use redshift instead of distances, which from here you can then, once you get the speed, you can actually work out the distance from the Hubble constant. You can see here the recession velocity versus the distance once you have the velocity here. The reason they do that is because the Hubble constant depends on the cosmological model that you're using for the expansion of the universe. So it's better to express it in terms where it's model independent. It's also it becomes an intuitive way of thinking also. So for instance, then the dancing ghosts here, this is at a redshift of 0.0718. And if you take the previous information, you work that out to 1.3 billion light years. So I'll be adding this as annotation while my slideshow has decided to yet quit again. Sorry for these technical difficulties. And now PowerPoint is gone. Okay. Also, while I'm pulling up PowerPoint yet again, well, here it comes. You can't determine, if you have a radio source, you can't really determine the distance without, okay, I'm just pulling up the slide, without an actual host to pair it with. Right. Okay, so you need the host because the host is what's giving you optical spectrum from which you know the chemical structure and then can ascertain the distance, whereas a radio signature radio doesn't give you that in general. Okay, so next up is a double lobe radio galaxy, which I show here. And the interesting thing about this is you notice the shape here, and what they think is happening is that these jets are being blown back by intercluster medium. And it's a relative thing. So really this is moving towards us at roughly on line of sight at 20 degrees from line of sight. And so they figure that's what's happening here. And this is why it's being spalated like this. Okay, I'm gonna try and go through these quicker. This one is referred to as smoking gun. Basically, it's a radio image here and here, and these are two potential sources. However, we see no jet activity happening here. And so this is probably a remnant, and this is these are just decaying gaseous lobes. So like these things here. And they think the most likely candidate galaxy from where these originated is this one at redshift 0.1, which is 1.5 billion years away, light years. So light takes 1.5 billion years to get to us. Okay, then there's the EMU, this galaxy, which appears at first to be a two-lobe structure, but they can't find any corresponding optical or infrared components except this one quasar here. So what it seems to suggest is that perhaps these are two separate two separate structures where this has some host that we haven't found, and that perhaps this quasar is a potential host for this radio image here. Okay, so what is a quasar? Well, okay, so this is a model of, if you remember, I showed you way back when this image here, whoops, here. And so what I'm showing here is just a toy model of that. And really a quasar, it just depends where you look. If you're looking at this angle, it appears to be a quasar, a bright source, because you're looking right at the core. Whereas if you're looking here, it's coming head on, so it looks like a blazar. So for historical reasons, you would see all these objects and they didn't know that it was a unified thing. So this is what they tend to believe now when you see these different objects such as Seifert galaxies and so forth, that really you're just looking at a different angle at which the jets are coming towards you from these active galactic nuclei. So moving right along, this, whoops, these are new objects that are discovered by the EMU pilot survey, and they're called radio circles, odd radio circles. And the reason they're called odd radio circles is because they don't appear to have any exist as we know. For instance, in terms of active galactic nuclei, we can't find optical counterparts or infrared counterparts. Doesn't appear to be a supernova remnant, etc. So it's a new object that was discovered by EMU, or a new class of objects. It could be that maybe, because some of them they found a galaxy at the core, and it could be that there was a burp and you got the shock wave, or it could be and we're looking head on at some leftover radio lobe, some remnant or something. And this is just an example of a star-forming galaxy. It's a composite of Parkes All-Sky Survey and H1 spectra that was obtained from the Atacama compact, sorry, not Atacama, Australian compact array. Basically, it shows that these are the radio contour lines from the EMU survey. And this bluish color basically indicates that there's a lot of gas around and stars are forming in this. So this is a star forming spiral galaxy. And it's part of an interacting pair, which is, the other one's way up the top of this image to the north. Okay, then we have class of giant radio galaxies. So this thing is about 22 arc minutes in extent. And what you see here is this diffuse radio image of these jets coming out and then spalating into these lobes due to the medium. And over here is just a blow up with corresponding radio contour lines and dark energy survey background. Okay, and then last image. This is a galaxy cluster. It's a composite image, so it's what's called a multi-wavelength image. It has EMU radio contours, DES optical image, all these colors, and then the red here is the Chandra X-rays. So this is contributing to what's called multi-spectrum astronomy. So yeah, so that actually covers all the sections within the EMU pilot survey paper, and in fact, most of the images that are within that paper. So I thought this would be an interesting thing to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Very interesting.
There's no questions. I will stop sharing.
Alexa's talking.
We need to make sure that it
Thanks,
has
Mom.
the right flavors, the right seasonings.
And
it's very hard to cook enough food
Alexa,
for
stop.
15 plus people.
I have to start a timer for 15 minutes.
Tomahawk is
Reverend Jimmy?
I am Jamie.
What's all that?
Sure, I'm trying to find where it's coming from.
Sorry, we had some background noise there.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. Are there any questions for Michelle?
I have one. I don't know if she can answer it or not, but I don't get to, this won't be my normal nasty one here, Michelle. Question.
Well, I didn't bring
Well,
up any. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, when you mentioned about the 944 megahertz survey, I'm assuming that they're doing 944 megahertz because that's how deeply redshifted that radio spectrum is from, say, neutral hydrogen. Is that right? I know it sounds like a dumb question, but I'm assuming that's what that means.
Well, actually, that's the central bandwidth frequency. It actually, I don't remember it basically, ASCAP, I forget what the frequency range is, but it does over a frequency range, and I just quoted the central frequency range. I don't believe that frequency corresponds to the hydrogen wavelength. I could be wrong on that, but it doesn't sound familiar. They choose these wavelengths to complement the rest of radio astronomy and to look for specific sources. So yeah, I don't know all the reasoning, but the ASCAP, the square kilometer array, does have various wavelengths within it.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Don't see anything in chat.
Okay, did I stop sharing? I don't know.
Yeah, yes, you did.
Okay. Okay, I will sign up. I will go in silent mode then.
Okay, thank you. She's working with Professor Bryan Gainsler to analyze data from the upcoming POSSUM Polarization Sky Survey of the Universe's Magnetism Survey using the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder ASCAP, which you just heard about and saw pictures of in Dr. Boyce's presentation. Jennifer's also enthusiastic about astronomy education and outreach. She's a recipient of the International Dark Sky Association's Dark Sky Defender Award in 2011 and the RASC's Ken Chilton Prize in 2010 for her contributions to astronomy education and outreach. Jennifer completed her PhD at the University of Manitoba in 2016, working with Dr. Samar Safi Harb. She joined Dunlap Observatory in September 2016. So thank you for joining us, Jennifer. Can you hear us? Are you good to go?
Yeah.
Hi there. Okay. All yours.
Perfect. I guess yeah, there we go. Okay. So I think you should all be able to see my slides now. Yep. Perfect. All right. Well, thanks very much for inviting me to give this talk. So I'm going to talk to you today about a project that I've been working on for quite a long time, but this paper was just published. Well, it was just accepted about a month ago, and it will be published in the next few weeks. And it managed to get a lot of attention in the media. I think the idea of it was sort of interesting and exciting, and so it I think captured a lot of attention. So I hope to be able to tell you a little bit about this project and maybe give you more of the inside story if you want. So I will begin with an image that is hopefully familiar and probably familiar to most of you who are listening here. This is the night sky as seen. This is from the southern hemisphere, and so the Milky Way galaxy is stretching across the top of this image. Sorry, through here. It's actually, if you're wondering why it might look a little bit strange to people in the northern hemisphere, it's kind of upside down because it's seen from the southern hemisphere. I have another version of this. So when we are outside at night, we can see the Milky Way galaxy that is stretching across our sky. And depending on the time of year and where we are on the Earth, we may be able to see it a little bit better. We may be able to see into the galactic center if we're a little bit farther south than we are here in Winnipeg. And one of the things that I think always has, I guess, struck me about looking up at the night sky at night is that everything we see with our eyes is part of our Milky Way, with a couple of exceptions. But by and large, all of the stars that we see every direction in the sky are part of our Milky Way galaxy. And there are billions of other galaxies out there, but they're not visible with our eyes directly. We need telescopes to see them, and sometimes radio telescopes that you heard about in the previous talk. And but all of the things we see visually are part of our Milky Way galaxy, which is our home. And so this image here is also the Milky Way, and it might look a little bit familiar and maybe a little bit different. This is actually taken with the Gaia Observatory, which makes this image really interesting because it's actually not an image at all. It's not like something that you would go and take a snapshot of the sky, although it sort of looks like that. This image is actually taken by observing individual stars and observing the brightness of individual stars. And then this image has been constructed by all those individual measurements. And so these are all of the stars in our Milky Way that are observable from this satellite called Gaia. And we actually do see a few other points of light in this image. There's this over here, which some of you might be able to recognize as the Andromeda Galaxy. And then down below, we have the large and small Magellanic Clouds. And so these are examples of those objects that I mentioned that are not part of our Milky Way galaxy and that are actually in there are other galaxies outside of our own. And the only galaxies that we can see without the aid of a telescope, aside from our Milky Way. So this is the astronomer's view, if you will. When we observe the sky, you know, if you're observing at night and you see the Milky Way, it's obstructed by the horizon. And if you want to create an image like this, you have to travel to different places on Earth, and you have to put several images together because, or at least wait a year to observe the entire sky without having the sun get in the way part of the sky. So an image like this is not possible to take at once, but this is the whole entire galaxy. So the whole entire sky that's put together onto one single map. And you can think of this kind of like the way we look at the Earth. So we can make a map of the whole entire Earth that is stretched onto a two-dimensional surface. Now the Earth is a sphere in space that we're seeing the outside of, and our Milky Way is a little bit different because we're actually viewing it from the inside. And so the whole sky is the Milky Way. So this is a picture of the whole entire sky. Sorry. And like our Earth has an equator, and we can define the north and south pole of our Earth, the Milky Way also has an equator, a galactic equator, and a north and south pole of the Milky Way. So when astronomers talk about our galaxy, we can talk about the position within the galaxy, and we can often view the maps of our galaxy in this kind of representation where the equator goes through the middle of our image here, and we have the poles at the top and the bottom. So this is more or less what we see with our eyes or what we see with a camera or an optical telescope. But I am a radio astronomer. And so the images that I was studying for this paper that I published used a radio telescope. And some of the images use this radio telescope. This is actually located in Canada, in British Columbia, at the Dominion Radio Astrophysical Observatory. And this is a 26-meter diameter radio telescope. And a telescope like this can take an image of the sky that looks similar to this. And so this is an image of the sky of the whole galaxy as it's seen in radio light. So this is what we see when we point our radio telescope and we look at the whole entire sky and make a map. And some of the things in this image might jump out at you if you're looking at this for the first time. And I still remember when I first saw a map like this, when I was doing my undergraduate degree a long time ago, I saw a map like this. And one of the things that is really, really striking in this map is this big arc that goes across the middle of the map. And this has been known about for a very long time, since we started looking at the sky with radio telescopes. So for the last 50 years at least, we've known about this. And this is a big object called the North Polar Spur. And so I have another image here which labels some of these objects. So the North Polar Spur is this large bright thing that goes across the top of our galaxy, and not quite so visible in this map, but we'll talk about more and show you some other images later. But there's other things that are coming off the plane of the galaxy. So here is the galactic equator. This is the center of the galaxy. If we compare it to that optical image again, this is the galactic center. And in the radio image, it's very bright in the center. And the galactic plane is also fairly bright. And there's other bright patches and bright bits that are coming off the galactic plane. But the most striking thing, I think, is this big arc. And there's been a lot of controversy over exactly what this arc is. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the things that I think is kind of cool is that if we look at this optical image and you look at it carefully, it's actually hard to see in this image that I'm showing on the screen, but there actually is some dark stuff that stretches up here that is coincident with that bright radio thing. I'll show a better image in a minute. There's also this dust here that you can see, or this dark stuff here, which is actually dust. And then there's some clumpy stuff over here, which corresponds to this bright area that I've labeled the fan region. So there actually is some correspondence in our optical map between what we see here and what we see in radio. Although here optically it looks dark and not glowing, instead it's black. And that's because these are dusty regions in our galaxy that are actually blocking the light behind it. We can also look at the sky and the map in the same kind of view, the same map of the sky with X-rays. And so this is a new X-ray map made with a satellite called Erosita. And Erosita was launched just a few years ago, and it's been in the sky and up above the Earth observing X-rays. So this is our best X-ray map of the entire sky that we've ever made. And we also see this big arc in the Erosita map. And so this map was actually published last year, and there was a lot of excitement about this finding. And the astronomers who published this paper think that this big arc is something associated with the center of our galaxy. So here is our galactic center. And you may know that we think that there is a very massive black hole at the center of our galaxy. And when we look at our galaxy in gamma rays, which are even more energetic than X-rays, we actually see these two bright blobs that are coming from the galactic center above and below the plane. And those have been come to known as the Fermi bubbles, because they were observed in gamma rays by the Fermi satellite, which is another space probe that's up in a space telescope that observes from space, because we can't observe gamma rays from the Earth. And if we make a composite image with the X-rays and the gamma rays, there's a very tantalizing appearing connection that appears. So it seems like this big arcs right over the top of the Fermi bubbles. And so the people who published the paper last year said that this North Polar Spur was associated with the galactic center. They're not the first group to claim this. A lot of X-ray work has led to this conclusion that the North Polar Spur is associated with our galactic center. And I guess one of the motivations for making and drawing this conclusion is that we have other galaxies And this is another galaxy that is observed with radio waves, and these bright orange blobs here and here, and this blue jets that are coming from the center of this galaxy are thought to be caused by outflows from the center, from the supermassive black hole in the center of this galaxy. And so when we see this, it's easy to make that connection, and it's quite compelling. All that being said, there is a lot of other studies that have been done on this North Polar Spur. This is a very well-studied object, and there is a lot of other evidence that contradicts this idea that this blue X-ray emission is associated with the galactic center. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what some of the other work has done. And the main argument that the X-ray studies make is, well, there's two. One is just the appearance, that it looks like they arc over. But I mean, as a scientist, we have to be open to the idea that just because something looks a certain way, that doesn't mean that that's the way it is. We need to look for other evidence, and we need to have all of the observations support the model that we're going to present. So the appearance alone, I think, is not sufficient to prove that this blue X-ray emission and the red from gamma rays is associated. There's another piece of evidence from X-rays that there's a spot down here at the bottom, which is black here in X-rays, and that this is due to a cloud that is fairly far away. And so the conclusion is that this must be fairly far away because it has to be behind this dark cloud, which is blocking our view. And so that's something that I will talk about in the next few slides. I just wanted to point that out. So coming back to our radio picture and our radio view of the sky, I mentioned that this in X-rays, the X-ray astronomers think that this is far away. But there's other astronomers who look at this with other wavelengths, and in particular wavelengths that probe dust. And here's the map of the sky with dust. And so this is closer to radio wavelengths. This is microwaves more. And if you look carefully in this map, there's also some emission up here that looks like it could be associated with the North Polar Spur. And there is another bright patch of emission on this side, which looks like it's coincident with this region that I've labeled the fan region. So I want to talk a little bit more about this dust. We can also look at gas. So we can look at the sky with a particular frequency that picks up the gas emission in the galaxy. And that's what this map is showing you here. This is a map of hydrogen gas. And we also have emission from hydrogen gas that looks like it's coincident with this North Polar Spur and with the fan region. So as I said, the appearances are not sufficient. So we need more evidence, and we need to dig into this a little bit more. One of the things we can do with gas is we can look at how fast it's moving. And that actually gives us an indication of where it is in our galaxy. And it turns out this gas is moving pretty slowly. And the inference from slow moving gas is that it's actually fairly nearby and local. So this is one piece of evidence that this gas that looks coincident with the North Polar Spur is actually very nearby and not far away at all. But that's still not enough evidence. So what else can we do? Well, I want to come back to this map, which is from Gaia. So I mentioned that Gaia is a satellite, and it is looking at individual stars in our galaxy. And for every star, it's making very careful measurements, and it can measure the brightness and how red or blue that star is, its color, but it's also measuring very, very carefully its position. And by measuring its position at different times of the year, as the Earth goes around the sun in its orbit, the stars that are nearby will actually appear to move with respect to the stars that are much farther away. And this is a phenomenon called parallax. You might be familiar with it. You can see this if you hold your finger up in front of your face and you close one eye and then close the other eye. Your finger is going to appear to move against whatever you're seeing in the background. And if you know the distance around the Earth, from the Earth to the sun, and you know the distance that the Earth has traveled in its orbit, then you can very carefully and very precisely calculate the distance to that star that appears to move. And so in this way, the Gaia satellite is actually able to map the distances to billions of stars very, very precisely. And so this is just a little infographic to tell you how many stars that Gaia has actually looked at. And this one in the middle is the important one for what I'm talking about. So it's over 1 billion stars have had their parallax measured with a very high precision that allows us to know the distance to those stars very well. And we can also see how the color of that star appears. And from that information, we can actually map the dust clouds that are between us and that star. And that lets us make a map that looks sort of like this. And so this is a 3-dimensional reconstruction of dust clouds in our galaxy that are pretty close to us. So at the top here is 1,000 light years, which is a far distance, but on the scale of our galaxy is actually quite close. I'll show you a picture in just a second to illustrate that. But this is really cool now. We can map the exact amount of dust, and we know the exact distance. And so we can make this really interesting 3-dimensional map that shows us where the dust is in our galaxy. And we are actually located right here in the middle of this blank region. And so this blank opening in the middle is something that's called the local bubble. And I will show you another picture of that a little bit later. But this is where we're located. We're in this middle of this void in this blank region, and we have these big dust clouds surrounding us. So I pointed out that this map is 1,000 light years across. And so on the scale of the whole galaxy, this is a top-down artist rendition of what our galaxy might look like if we could go in a spaceship and fly above it. And our whole galaxy is 100,000 light years across. Our sun is right here, and the galactic center is here. So the galactic center is about 30,000, maybe 20,000 light years from us. And our sun here in the middle, this little green box here is about the size of that dust box that I was showing you. So it's pretty close by. This is local stuff, even though it's 1,000 light years. So 1,000 light years is the distance that light can travel. And to give you some reference, our nearest star to the sun is about 4 years away. And so there's quite a few stars in this 1,000 light year box. And you can kind of see from this picture as well. There's a lot of stars packed into this, this area, which is what's sometimes called our local neighborhood. So if we take that 3-dimensional map and we look at it on the sky, it looks like this. And so we can actually now know what dust that is looks like it's coincident with these features that we see in radio, and we can measure the distance to these features very carefully using the distance to stars. So that's one way we, or one piece of evidence that we have that the North Polar Spur, and probably at least some of the fan region, is actually more local and unlikely to be located at the galactic center for the North Polar Spur. At least it's unlikely that all of the emission is there. But there's still more evidence, and so I'd like to present other observations that also support this idea that the North Polar Spur is actually pretty nearby. So one of the pieces of evidence is actually the magnetic field, and that was the picture that showed up in a lot of the press releases were showing the magnetic field of the North Polar Spur. And so I want to talk about how that picture was made and what we're actually measuring when we see pictures like that of the magnetic field. So when I say magnetic fields, I think a lot of us, the first thing we might think of is the sun, because the sun is the source of magnetic fields that is maybe a little bit familiar to us. And this is a real sequence of images. And in this image, you can basically see the magnetic field lines. These strands are charged particles that are glowing, and they are being accelerated and trapped by the magnetic field lines. And so they're showing us the magnetic field of the sun at the surface of the sun. And this magnetic field extends very far into space, and it interacts with the Earth's magnetic field and does lots of good things for us, including protecting us from high energy particles, protecting the Earth from those particles so they're not bombarding us. So the magnetic field, it's related to very fast moving charged particles. Now, another thing that might occur to you if I say magnetic field is a picture like this. And this is a typical bar magnet. And if you take a bar magnet and put a piece of paper on it and sprinkle pieces of metal, iron filings on that paper, they're going to arrange themselves in a pattern like this. And why do they do this? Well, this bar magnet has what we call a magnetic field. And this is the pieces of metal are aligning themselves along those magnetic field lines. And they're highlighting the magnetic field. So we can use some similar ideas to observe magnetic fields in space, and specifically using radio waves. And one of the properties that we use when we want to observe magnetic fields is the fact that radio waves that are coming from space, where we have magnetic fields, are polarized. And so what does this mean? Well, light is a wave, and it travels to us through space as a wave. And usually those waves are all jumbled up and they don't have any particular alignment or pattern. But when we have a magnetic field and we have certain kinds of radio waves, then we actually have the radio waves all lined up nicely, and we say that it's polarized. So the orientation of that wave is steady, and it doesn't rotate and doesn't change its orientation, and all of the waves that are coming from the same place have the same kind of orientation. And we can observe these by using a Polaroid or a polarizing filter, which some of you might be familiar with if you have, say, polarized sunglasses. If you put sunglasses on, it's blocking the light and things go dark because it's only letting through waves with a certain kind of polarization. And so we can use this principle on our radio telescope and observe only the polarized waves. And then we can actually measure the orientation of that wave when it hits our telescope. And how does this help us with the magnetic field? Well, if you can imagine a star, so there's actually two ways. And so one of the ways is if we have a star in space and that star is emitting light that has it's not polarized at all. But that starlight passes through an area of space that has a magnetic field. Then that in that area of space, we also have dust. And dust tends to align itself with the magnetic field, kind of like our iron filings lined themselves with our magnet. And what happens is as the starlight passes through this region of space, the light actually becomes polarized. And so the light that passes through this region emerges from, it goes from being unpolarized to being polarized. And its degree or its orientation of polarization matches our magnetic field. And so if we can measure the orientation of the polarized light, we can actually measure or infer what the magnetic field was doing as it passed through. And so an observer like the Planck telescope can see this polarized light, measure its orientation, and from that we can make a map like this, where the lines on this map are now showing us how the magnetic field is oriented in space. Now, this is hard to interpret still because we're still looking at a three-dimensional thing flattened onto a two-dimensional surface. But we can use information like that three-dimensional dust map and start to disentangle this and start to understand the three-dimensional structure of what we're seeing. And once again, I want to point out that this North Polar Spur seems to have some magnetic field lines that look like they're following it. And the same can be said for this band region. Now, there's another kind of light that we observe with the radio telescope, and that's called synchrotron radiation. And this comes from really fast-moving electrons that are trapped in a magnetic field. And they are also polarized, and they are also polarized with an orientation that is determined by the orientation of the magnetic field. And so from that, we can make another map. And so this is a totally different kind of map than the one I just showed you, but it looks kind of similar. So once again, the North Polar Spur shows up and the magnetic field lines seem to align itself with the orientation of the North Polar Spur and also with the span region. So if I go between these two maps, you can see that there are differences, but there's also some significant similarities. And so we can also measure the polarization of the individual stars and see if that lines up with the dust. And remember, with stars, with Gaia, we can actually know the distance to each individual star. And so this is an example that shows how well the star polarization lines up with the dust polarization. And from that, we know the distance to each individual spot because we can measure the distance to those stars. And so this is another study that was done showing this is actually the light coming from that object, the North Polar Spur. This is the top part, and this is the bottom part. And the red lines are the polarization that comes from that synchrotron radio light, and the yellow lines are coming from starlight. And the thing to notice here is in this part of the map, the yellow lines and the red lines, they kind of align with each other. And because they align with each other, we can say that the stuff that's emitting the red and the stuff that's emitting the yellow must be at the same distance. And because the stuff that is emitting the yellow is coming from stars, and we can measure the distance to those stars, then we know that the stars are nearby, then we say, and we can infer that the radio emission is also nearby. However, over here on the other side, this is low down on that North Polar Spur. The red lines and the yellow lines don't match at all. And because they don't match, we know that the stars are nearby, but the red lines must be coming from something that's more distant. And so instead of having a picture where the North Polar Spur is something that is all far away, we have this kind of weird picture that's emerging, that part of the North Polar Spur is nearby and part of it is distant. And so that is a bit of a contradiction, and no one had come up with a model that explained how those two things could be true at the same time. How could one part be distant and one part be close? So this is where my story begins. So all of that was some background to this discovery that I have published. And so we'll go back to this radio map again. And I talked about, we can look at radio light being polarized. And so if we actually look at the polarized version of this map, it looks something like this. And so suddenly most of the map disappears, and all we're left with are these two bright objects in the sky, the North Polar Spur and the fan region. And so this is a fairly new map. And a number of years ago, about 3 years ago, I was sitting and staring at this map and wondering why these two objects were both so bright in the sky when everything else was not visible. And so that got me thinking about whether these two objects could actually be related somehow, or have some similar origin because they both have the similar properties in the polarized light. So I want to go back to our map of the Earth. And so another part of this story is that I was sitting in a conference, and someone mentioned how when we look at a map of the Earth and we look at Antarctica down at the bottom, it looks huge and like it's spread across a very large area. In this map, it looks like it's as big as all of Europe and Asia combined. But if we shift our perspective of this map a little bit and change the orientation, we can appreciate that Antarctica isn't really big at all. It's quite small, and it's just the way the map is drawn that gives us a distorted picture of what we're seeing. So coming back to this map, I was looking at these two bright objects and started to wonder what the map would look like if we shift our position. And so I picked a position between these two and decided, okay, what's this map going to look like if I center it on this spot instead of the galactic center where this map is always, how this map is always drawn. And when I redrew the map, I got something that looked like this. And suddenly these two features don't look so disconnected anymore. They look like they're going roughly parallel to each other, and that there could be some connection there. And what's more is the North Polar Spur no longer looks to arch so convincingly over the galactic center. It's going more or less straight. And so I thought that was really interesting as well. So this was the start of my journey to working on this paper and to trying to understand whether these objects could be related. The next part was a colleague of mine sent me an old paper from 1965, and they noticed in that paper there was a comment that said that the North Polar Spur and the fan region could be features of the local arm in which the sun is embedded. So what does that mean? Well, if we come back to our map of the Milky Way galaxy, these are the arms of the Milky Way galaxy. These are the spiral arms. And our sun is located right here in this region, which is sometimes referred to as the local arm. So there's some bunch of stars here that are all densely packed together. to form a spiral arm. And our sun is located within the spiral arm. And this is, as I said, sometimes called the local arm. And if we look at the orientation of the local arm with respect to the whole galaxy, it has an orientation of about 70 degrees galactic longitude, where 0 degrees is pointing towards the galactic center. So it's about 70 degrees angle there. So I did a really simple experiment. I said, okay, let's imagine that we are in an arm of the galaxy, and all of the magnetic field is going in this direction, going by us, and we're sitting there and we're inside of this space. So if you imagine, this is a top-down view, and we have 3 lines here. So if you look directly above your head and imagine these 3 lines going by you over your head, like an airplane contrail in the sky. And then there's another 3 of them below your feet and 2 more on either side of you. So you're surrounded by 8 straight lines. And I added a magnetic field into these lines and said, okay, let's pretend that we'll observe this with a radio telescope, and what would it look like? And it turns out it looks like this, which we get lines that seem to correspond to features that we actually see in the sky. And there's this other one here, which looks similar to what we see as the fan region. I shifted those lines, changed the angle a little bit, and got something that even more resembles what we see. And so this map here at the bottom, haven't shown you yet, but it is also a polarization map of the sky at a different radio frequency than the one I showed you before. And if I overlay these, you see that there's some correspondence, but there's also quite a bit of difference here, especially at the bottom. And if you recall, I said that a lot of the studies have shown that this part of the North Polar Spur is close to us, but this part down here, the evidence says that it's far away. And so I was thinking about that and thought, even in the straight line model, but if I adjust the model a little bit and curve those lines, then this end over here is far away, whereas this end here is actually nearby. And it turns out this part of the emission is all caused by the space that's in between these 2 little red lines. So all really close to us, and we're here at this red dot, which is the sun. And this part here, which stretches quite far away, is actually the bit here down at the bottom, which the evidence says is far away. And so when I take this set of lines and simulate what that looks like with a radio telescope, we get something that looks like this. And so suddenly we have something that really looks like what we actually observe in the sky with our radio telescopes. And so if I draw this on our Milky Way map, here is our Milky Way diagram again. That red dot there is the position of the sun, and this is our local arm. And these little curved lines are about that long, which is about 1,000 light years long. So again, our nearest star is only 4 light years away. So this is still quite large and a very far distance in space, but on the scale of our whole galaxy, it's really quite close to us. It's in our local neighborhood, if you like. And so this is ultimately the model that I published that seems to be able to explain a lot of the observations. And any good model that we present in science has to be able to explain all of the observations. So we have to keep testing this model. And if we find other observations at some point that don't agree with this model, then we either have to throw the model away or we have to modify it and come up with a new version of it. Another interesting thing is that these lines are curved in kind of an arc. And this blue line that I've drawn here is actually the direction to supernova explosions. So this yellow bubble that I'm showing here, this in the pale yellow, when I showed that three-dimensional map of the dust, there was that blank region. I said we were in the middle of it. And this is called the local bubble. And this local bubble is thought to have been caused by about 10 or 12 explosions of stars in our nearby galaxy. And this is the direction which we think those stars were in when they exploded. And so the idea of this model that I'm presenting is that these filaments, or these lines, are actually compressed gas that was caused by these explosions that also evacuated the space around us and created the local bubble. So my interpretation of what these are actually kind of like the walls of the local bubble. Now this one here is drawn kind of through the local bubble, but it could actually be moved this way a little bit more, and it doesn't actually change the model that much. So it can actually be following more or less along this dust wall over here. Now, there's one thing I haven't explained, and I've kept calling this the fan region, but why is it called the fan region? And the reason is that in 1964, this observation was made of the polarization in the fan region, and the orientation of the polarized waves in this part of the sky kind of look like a fan. They look like they're pointing in opposite directions on the opposite side. And the models that I've come up with can actually explain this as well. And this is a slightly more esoteric, if you will, explanation. But if you look at this arrow here, this is the direction of the magnetic field along this line. And there's this property of light that's called Faraday rotation, and it depends on the direction of the magnetic field. So if it's pointing towards us, it goes counterclockwise, and if it's pointing away from us, it goes clockwise. And so if you look at the way that we would see this line from the sun, if we're looking at it on this side, the line is actually coming towards us. But if we look in the other direction, oops, sorry. If we look in the other direction, that line is going away from us. And using the Faraday rotation going in opposite directions, we can actually get, this creates this fan-like appearance of the magnetic field in the fan region in our model, which matches pretty well what we see in the observations. So ultimately, this is the model of a three-dimensional schematic that we're left with. And I actually have a true three-dimensional view as well that I can show you. You can move it around. And so this is what I presented in the paper, and in the press release that we did, I had this idea that this is kind of like a tunnel. And so that's where this idea of the tunnel in the sky came from, because these are curved lines and they're surrounding us. And if you look at the way, say, the lines of the lights and the road lines in this tunnel form, they actually have this appearance. And when I plot this map, the way we would actually see it in the sky, we have quite a striking similarity. And I have to say that when I made this picture, I actually surprised myself with how much it resembles this tunnel. So this is the view that you would see in the real sky if you could see the radio light with your eyes. So I have directions marked on here. I did make this map with stellarium, which is I'm sure most of you are, or many of you are familiar with for looking at where the constellations are going to appear in the sky. And so then I've actually added the stars and the constellations here. And so you can sort of map out where you would see these bright streaks across the sky if your eyes could see radio light. So if you can find Cassiopeia and Cepheus, this fan region in Perseus is running along those constellations. And over here in the North Polar Spur is going through Boötes and Corona Borealis and through into Hercules. And this is actually set as we would see it from Winnipeg just after sunset, a little bit earlier in the year. But I think if you observe the sky and you can find these constellations, you can kind of get a sense of how this will stretch across the whole sky. And finally, here's the view without the radio. So if we just have the Milky Way that we see with our eyes, we can flip between these and you can see that I think it would just be awesome if we could actually see this radio structure. If we actually could see the radio light, we would see the structure going right across almost the entire sky. And so that is the story of this magnetic tunnel. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Jennifer, the implication of being in a tunnel is that you're moving through the tunnel. Is there any relationship between the direction that the sun is traveling in our galaxy and the tunnel?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that's one maybe bad thing about the analogy that I used, because it's not like we're speeding through this tunnel. It's more the geometry of the structure that I was referring to, and not so much the cars moving through the tunnel. So if you get rid of the cars and you're just in an empty tunnel, that's more like the picture that I have in mind. But you are right that we are moving through the galaxy. The sun is moving and all the stars are moving. But let me put up the picture of the whole galaxy here. So the whole galaxy is rotating, along with the sun. So the tunnel itself is moving, if that makes sense. So because the whole arm of the galaxy is moving through space. So the tunnel is moving, but so are we. We're all moving together. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
So I have a question. Is that I get the impression that's a local structure, but then when you look at the X-rays and gamma rays, that seems to be a structure that's closer to the center. So I'm a bit confused.
Sorry, I got a little. What was your question?
Well, when I look at those few lines that you have in the picture and your explanation, it seems to indicate that's a local phenomenon, like very close to us. But
yes,
when I look at the other stuff with the X-rays and gamma rays, that seems to be more related to the galactic center. So are they different things?
Yes, yes. So my interpretation is that they're different things. So I think that the Fermi bubbles probably are from the galactic center. And I think that it's probably a coincidence that this North Polar Spur looks like it's arching over the Fermi bubble. And I mean, when I look at this image, I think that the Fermi bubble looks somewhat offset from the orientation of where the North Polar Spur is. So, so I agree. This is, I mean, and that's really where this contradiction in the literature is coming from. There are a lot of, well, I don't know if I want to say a lot. There is a group of astronomers that still believe the North Polar Spur is part of the galactic center. But most of the astronomers who study radio waves don't agree with that, because there is a lot of evidence to say that this part has to be local, very local. and so can't be at the galactic center. The
we're-
main argument that puts this at the galactic center is just the appearance. And I don't think that is sufficient. You need more evidence than just what it looks like.
Okay, so that's interesting then. So we don't really see the larger magnetic field structure of the galaxy. What we're seeing is a very local structure, which is confirmed by coincidence with Gaia and your other polarization images.
Right. So the magnetic field lines, I think, at least in terms of those in these structures, that we're seeing something quite local.
Okay. One last question. Do we see any other like global magnetic field phenomena, or we can't pinpoint that exactly? Like outside of this tunnel, can we see anything else?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I don't have anything to show you from this presentation, but this bright emission here is probably local. A lot of the other magnetic field in here, in this particular map, is probably local, but there's definitely parts of the sky where we're seeing global magnetic field, and that's also an area that I do research on as well, is what's the large scale magnetic field of the whole galaxy. But it's always a challenge to be able to tell the difference between what's local and what's not, because we're constantly fighting this superposition of local stuff. And if it's nearby and pretty small, then it's still going to look huge in the sky. Whereas if it's far away, they're always battling each other and superimposed together. So we have to use other kinds of techniques to try to separate them. It's hard though.
Okay, thanks. The mystery of the tunnel is solved for me.
Okay.
So Jennifer, I have a question. It's Judy.
Hi.
That was a wonderful talk, and I wanted to thank you for the introduction, which you said was really long, but it was fantastic. So kind of walked us through all the different things that you were trying to think about all at once. So thanks for being so patient with us. So my question is, do you think there would be other tunnels along the other spurs? And somehow do they interact toward the center, and would they curve with the arms of those spurs?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I wish I had another map. I don't think I'm like looking at my extra slides. I don't have anything to show you, but I think the answer is yes. In other galaxies, so we can map magnetic fields of other galaxies as well. And one of the things that we know is that the magnetic fields follow the spiral arm. So the magnetic field looks uniform and regular. There's also a lot of like turbulence. So there's a lot of randomness to it as well. But overall, the average magnetic field of a galaxy seems to be regular and follow the structure of the spiral arms. So it's not a new idea that we could be seeing this, right? And so trying to see it though is the challenge. And it's like I said with the other comment, that we're always having to fight this superposition, and things are just, we're seeing everything all smushed together and we can't really separate them. But yes, and I think as we get better observations with radio telescopes, like they are improving, they're getting both more sensitive, and we're seeing finer detail. And there is actually another project that I'm working on right now, which is looking at much smaller scale lines, which could be a small version of this tunnel in a different part of the galaxy.
Very cool.
We have a question from Gilles. You've got your hand up.
Yes. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.
So that's really interesting. So I have a question about these four lines. So you can explain nicely like 4 big structures that we see in the sky. So using 4 lines that you draw on your map. But so can you have any idea like why are there like 4 discrete like lines that we see? You see what I mean? Like when you're in the tunnel, you see all of the tunnel, right? So why are there like 4 light lines?
Right. So first of all, I chose 4 because there seems to be kind of 4 bright-ish structures here. But there's others too, right? There's this thing, which has also been identified. And actually, if you look at the tunnel view, so you see what I'm pointing at here?
Mm-hmm.
This thing, at this tunnel view, that thing's actually this, which also seems to follow this tunnel. So I didn't, I focused on 4 because I wasn't going to model the whole sky, and it was somewhat a proof of concept idea. But I think that same model could probably explain, so there's other bits down here as well. So I don't think there's just 4. So that's the first part of the answer. But the other thing is that the idea of this being a compressed shock from multiple supernova explosions is, goes to what we see in supernova remnants, where we actually do see a filamentary structure in a lot of supernova remnants. And so I think that we're seeing this filamentary structure from close up and from the inside, and it just happens to be that there's 4 areas that are brighter, but I don't think there's anything special about the number 4. Also, the way I've drawn the line here, it's sort of, if you take these lines away and look at the map without any lines, you can see there's a bit of a filament here, and like it's not quite as clear cut, I think, as the 4 lines that I drew. Does that make sense? Like here as well, it's not a single discrete structure, but even though I modeled it that way. So I think actually at a higher resolution that those lines would break down and have more detail to them.
But so my question was more about the discreteness, and so you think these are like filaments that are like remnants of
yeah, I think the discreteness is a little bit artificial, to be honest, but but there's going to be parts that are more dense than other parts.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
If I can jump in. Okay, great, thank you. Just that's actually the first time I've heard of the local bubble, and that it could have been caused by multiple supernova explosions. So it sounds like we're our star is in some space that is fairly devoid of dust. I'm just wondering if you would know what would happen, just kind of doing a mind experiment, if our sun, our solar system was in space that actually is in dust. How would things be different for us? Would there be any difference for us? Like, would there be more micrometeorites, that kind of thing?
That's an interesting question. I haven't, to be honest, thought too deeply about that. The density of the dust that we see, it's very low, and so I don't know that it would make a huge difference, but certainly it would change the appearance of our sky. It probably would obscure more of our sky. The fact that we're a little bit farther away from the dust cloud means that it's, so if I show the map, that this map, right? This dark area here are the blotches of dust that we're seeing. And so if we were right inside of it, as opposed to it being a little bit farther away, these would be a lot bigger in the sky, but then they would also be a lot more diffuse, if that makes sense. So I think they would just change the appearance of our sky a little bit. As to having more meteorites, I don't really think that that would be the case, because this dust is microscopic, like it's very, very, very tiny. And the dust, I think, that causes meteors is a little bit larger scale. It's more stuff that we find in our immediate solar system vicinity. Though I'm not a meteorite astronomer at all, so I could have that wrong, but my intuition is that it wouldn't change it dramatically, but it certainly would change the appearance of our sky a little bit.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think Michelle had her hand raised.
Yes, I was just looking at that last slide you had before this one.
The one I had up on the screen, you mean?
Yeah. Something I
Remember
think
which one
just,
it was?
it was with the 4 dust laying things.
Oh, okay, yeah, this one?
Yeah, no, there were 2 of them. One on the top was the model and one below was,
This one?
yeah, that's it. So the top image on the left, is that us looking down the tunnel, and on the right, the back of the tunnel? Is that?
No. So this one on the bottom is a map of the Milky Way. This is a
the
map.
top? Yeah.
The top is, okay, yeah. So the top is this picture.
Right.
So yeah. So these 2 are
looking forward, or however you
are looking above our heads, actually.
Okay.
So they're the ones above our heads. So the tunnel is down through here, like where my mouse is. So that's where the lines are converging together.
Where's the Earth?
Well, the Earth isn't. So in this map, the Earth is at the middle, at the intersection of the gray lines.
Okay, so I'm looking. Okay, yeah, my brain is hurting. I see 2 points of focus on the image on the right, and I thought I understood it, but not
Right.
quite.
So this is looking in this direction, and then this point over here is looking in that direction.
Okay, so I do have it right. Yeah. Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of cool. Thanks.
Do we have any more questions? No more questions. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming and explaining this to us. It was a very abstract concept when you read the press coverage, but that makes it so much clearer now. So really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Great. So everybody, Jennifer, you're welcome to stay as well and socialize. So we'll be in a couple of minutes, we'll just be opening it up for everyone to chat and have our virtual Boston pizza. Feel free to order your own pizza and bring your own beer and your cats, apparently. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Just as a point of interest, I noticed some names I'm not familiar with, not sure if it's new members or visitors. If you are a visitor, could you put your hand up for me, if you could, just so we can see. Okay, so doesn't look like. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you very much, everybody. So our next meeting is in December, obviously. I believe it's December 10th. And as I mentioned at the beginning, part of that meeting will be ratification of the bylaws for the center. We want that to go as quickly and painlessly as possible. So if you do have any questions or comments or anything to do with the bylaws, please contact myself or Dennis or any member of the council, and we will try to answer your question. Or, the one thing we do want to avoid in that meeting is wordsmithing the bylaws at that late date. We'd like to just kind of, get it approved and move on. And the bylaws were kind of the underpinning of changes to our structure so that we can do things like, buy property and get a credit card to pay for Zoom and all that kind of good stuff. And we wanted to move forward with that. And we're also able to get different funding sources if we're incorporated and that sort of thing. So we're looking forward to moving forward with a lot of that stuff. Any questions or comments, please direct it to a member of the council, and we'll be sure to get you an answer. So once again, thank you to everyone who presented this evening. We appreciate it. Thanks, Ed, for running the meeting for us once again and running the Zoom. This meeting has been recorded and will be posted on the website under the events tab, and as well will be posted to Facebook as soon as I can get it edited and up there. So thank you very much for coming. We'll see you at the virtual Boston Pizza.